Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and one thing that I thought we would see at Apple's last October event was a new Mac Mini. Yes, when Apple unveiled the very first M1 Macs, they did so with a three-pronged strategy of the entry-level M1 MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and of course the M1 desktop Mac Mini, and I thought logically that Apple would pursue this same strategy when they released the M1 Pro Macs with the M1 Pro 14-inch MacBook Pro and the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and of course the M1 Pro version of the Mac Mini. Yeah, you don't need me to tell you that unfortunately we did not get a release of any M1 Pro powered Mac Mini, or quite frankly any Pro version of Apple's desktop computers. Which quite frankly kind of stinks, because as much as I love the M1 Pro MacBook Pros, there are a lot of users who could care less about it because they either need or want a desktop version of the Mac, and the Mac Mini for a lot of people probably would have filled that role. But even though we didn't get that version of the Mac Mini, don't worry, because I still think it's coming, and we have a lot of clues and rumblings surrounding this device, and this could end up being the best valued Mac for performance per dollar if a lot of these reports turn out to be true. So for this video, I want to focus on everything we know so far about this powerful version of the Mac Mini. So if you aren't subscribed yet, get subscribed for even more Mac news and reviews, and if you're a returning viewer, well, don't forget to hit the like button on your way out, but don't leave yet, because there's still plenty of video to go around. Alright, so why am I so certain that there is a new Mac Mini coming? I think that's an important question to answer, because I think most people would look at Apple's website, see the silver M1 Mac Mini, and go, Greg, what are you talking about? Apple already updated the Mac Mini to the M1 chip. They don't have to release a new one. And while yes, there is a version of the Mac Mini with Apple Silicon inside of it, this isn't the Mac Mini update that I'm referring to, because if you scroll down on that same web page, you'll see your first big clue that there's something more in store for a better, more powerful version of the Mac Mini, because Apple still is selling that overpriced Intel variant, which besides its port advantage is basically a worse version of a cheaper M1 Mac Mini. And really, there's no reason to keep this version of the Mac Mini in the lineup unless Apple is planning to upgrade it with Apple Silicon. And I mean, heck, Apple even recently discontinued the entry-level iMac. So if that was on the chopping block, if there's no update for this computer being worked on internally at Apple, I'm sure this would have been discontinued by now. Besides that, we have heard multiple reports from well-trusted sources like Mark Gurman from Bloomberg and John Prosser of Front Page Tech, who have had multiple stories out about an update to the Mac Mini. So if we look at those reports, we can actually see a lot about what we are expecting with this overhaul to the Mac Mini, and it could be one of the biggest overhaul in years, with John Prosser and Mark Gurman both reporting that the design of the Mac Mini is going to change. Prosser describes this design as a completely new external chassis made from aluminum, but this time with a plexiglass reflective top. Prosser also said that the Mac Mini could come in a two-toned finish with maybe a different colored finish on the plexiglass on the top of the Mac Mini. So this design could shake things up a little bit from a looks perspective. And this plexiglass top could actually be a functional change depending on how the final design works. With the plexiglass top, it could provide a better, more transparent surface for signal to pass through. As some users of previous versions of the Mac Mini, I know a lot of people had trouble with the M1 Mac Mini. Sometimes they have random, Wi-Fi or Bluetooth dropouts. So maybe that plexiglass top will actually solve some of those issues. I think more importantly, the design of this Mac Mini could have the most robust port selection offered on any of the M1 Macs, with maybe the exception of the future Mac Pro, as we already know that the M1 Pro chip offers increased bandwidth for even more port connectivity, and we have seen this with the recent MacBook Pro. So for this Mac Mini, we really are expecting a lot of ports, with most reports and thinking seeming to suggest we should see about 4 Thunderbolt USB-C ports, 2 USB-A ports, a headphone jack, an HDMI port, an Ethernet port with the option for 10 gigabit Ethernet as well, and we could see the same magnetic power connector that we have on the M1 iMac. And even though these renders don't show it, I think we could see Apple bring the SD card slot back to this version of the Mac Mini as well. I think if it was good enough for the MacBook Pros, it would make sense on this desktop as well. Okay, now as for what is powering this Mac Mini, I think it's pretty simple to guess. Listen, I know we've heard some rumors about the possibility of like a dual M1 Pro or M1 Max chip and something like a future revision to the iMac Pro, and while I can definitely see something like that happening, I think the approach for the Mac Mini is just going to be a lot more simple, and I think we will basically just get the same versions of the M1 Pro and M1 Max chip that we currently already have in the recent MacBook Pros. Those chips in that form factor look to me like they would make the most sense from a power and performance standpoint, as well as a cost standpoint for the Mac Mini itself. And while I'd love to be wrong and see a more powerful version of the M1 chip inside of this desktop machine, I really don't think the Mac Mini needs any more performance, and matching what the M1 Max can already do would be a huge improvement for this machine. Don't forget, the M1 Max is already outscoring the Mac Pro in a lot of areas, and the fact that you'll be able to get an M1 Max Mac Mini for significantly less than what people spent on a Mac Pro with even more power, that's going to be a huge win for Mac customers. Speaking of price, I think that's also something that's going to be easy to nail down. Now, while the price of the MacBook Pro increased by $200 for the base level model, I don't think we will see any significant increase to the price of the Mac Mini compared to the current version that is already available on sale from Intel. What I mean by that is the major cost of the new MacBook Pros was due to the mini LED display. It's an expensive display to put in there, so the price was raised by $200 for the same exact specs. Now for this Mac Mini, I don't think there will be any significant price increase. However, we also have to take in consideration that the current Intel Mac Mini only comes with 8 gigabytes of memory. So if Apple is putting the M1 Pro chip into the Mac Mini, it's more likely that these machines will start with 512 gigabytes of storage and 16 gigabytes of memory. And if you spec an existing M1 Mac Mini to those specifications, you're at $1,099 already. So realistically, for a base model M1 Pro with 512 gigabytes of storage and 16 gigabytes of memory, it should be around a $1,300 starting price. And if we look at that price point and look at the performance you can get out of this machine, this is hands down going to be one of the best Macs you can buy from a value standpoint of the amount of performance you get from this Mac Mini for this amount of money. And I think this is going to be a really popular Mac with professionals, creators, and hobbyists because of the desktop form factor, the versatility, the performance, and of course the price point. As for when you can get the Mac Mini, well, the last thing we heard from Mark Gurman was that the Mac Mini would launch in the coming months after the MacBook Pro. Well, the MacBook Pro is officially out. We are in the coming months. So we should actually see that Mac Mini pretty soon. Now, realistically, I think we will probably see this Mac Mini at an event, but it is possible that Apple could announce the Mac Mini in a press release anytime between now and probably March, because I do think there is going to be some sort of March event. More realistically, though, I do think the Mac Mini will be shown off at that March event alongside an even bigger and more powerful 27-inch Pro iMac. And for the naming scheme, I think we could even see Apple brand this Mac Mini as a Mac Mini Pro. It's gonna have the M1 Pro chip in it. It'll probably be referred to as a Pro. But anyway, so far, that is everything we know about the next version of the M1 Pro Mac Mini, and it sounds like it is going to be a mini powerhouse of a computer. Hopefully you found this video informative and helpful, and if you did, be sure to give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed, and hey, if you think the M1 Mac Mini is good enough for your needs, I got reviews on that up here, and it's definitely a great Mac. So if you want to get that Mac, you can support the channel by buying it in one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.